let's make the best use of time and let's introduce our next speaker, because if you cannot reclaim the whole data privacy space, then you better remake it. And that's what this speaker's got in mind. Let me spotlight him. There he is, live streaming to us from Copenhagen, which is great. Jack, great to see you. So who's Jack?
Great to be here.
It's wonderful for you to be here. So he's Danish blockchain expert, award-winning, vast knowledge of the cryptocurrency space, regularly features in publications. Now, in 2015, he was known as Bitcoin Jack because he paid solely for everything that he needed with Bitcoin for an entire month. Now, I'm going to pause the introduction there for just one moment, because Jack, what was the value of Bitcoin in 2015 then?
Must have been a few $100s, I think, for one Bitcoin, $200 or $300. I remember I got my salary paid out in Bitcoin. I worked for a company called Coinify as the marketing manager, and that was one of kind of the marketing stunts I ended up inventing. Say, let's see if you give me, I think I said 20% more in salary this month, I'll make it only on Bitcoin, and I did. I didn't spend fiat once during that month, but in retrospect, I'm now the proud owner of the world's most expensive tattoo. I paid for the world's most expensive cab ride. I bought the world's most expensive bicycle. So yeah, it was a fun time.
I mean, Bitcoin's obviously gone down in price a little bit, but approximately, if we take it at say $30,000, it's that's 9,900% increase. So maybe, I don't know. I'm wondering if you wish you'd hung on to the Bitcoin rather than the bikes. But
well, most of the coins that I've ever had got lost in the Mt. Gox hack. Or wow. Theft or whatever that was, that whole thing. If we got some old school crypto people in this room, they maybe know the story of Mt. Gox or MT Gox.
People are nodding, yes.
But yeah, I mean, I got introduced to Bitcoin in 2013, and back then didn't know what it was. It was some kind of gaming currency, right? There were plenty of those, and I just thought, what the hell? Let me just get a few of those. Ended up wire transferring some money to a Japanese exchange, Mt. Gox, and I bought my Bitcoin, and I kept them on that exchange, and that's one of the most stupid things that you can do. But again, it was a worthless thing, almost worthless, right? Back in 2013, I think it was $13, $14, $15 for a coin. It's not worthless, but I mean, it's not what it is today. But when Bitcoin had its first surge in price, when it went from $15 to a few hundred, I of course got excited, but not only for the price, but also for what the hell is this thing? Because I heard more and more about it, and I started to try to understand blockchain and tokenization and that whole thing more. And being I love technology, and I have always had a technical mindset, so to speak, and to me, I understood the concepts quite easily, and made me apply for a position with a company, Coinify, and then I grew with that company and ended up running their innovation lab. And through my experiences there, I have a bunch of stories to tell, and I will try to keep this session thing relevant to the topic. There's 1,000 things that I can talk about, and I might even jump around in the slides, and maybe I'll change my mind. Let's see where we end up. I think that the first presentation we had was really inspiring, so I even added a few things in my own slides in the meantime. It's the good thing about not being the first. But yeah, I mean, let's just get started. I can share my screen. 1 second. You see the ARYZE thing? All right, great. 1 sec. All right, so we got kind of most of the initial story and the kind of how I got into the realm of cryptocurrencies and blockchain and all that. But as I mentioned, I in my time at Coinify, I was the head of innovation. We established an innovation lab, and That was a fantastic position for me because I'm an inventor of sorts. I'm not a technician or a programmer, but I seem to be able to draw some parallels and make some solutions that make sense. And that led me on a journey of working with, municipalities and NGOs and payment institutions and all kinds of different record labels, all kinds of different entities regarding, the common denominator was blockchain, right? Because that was the new thing. That was the nano of its time. It was, nobody knew what it was, but everybody wanted a piece of it. So my own company got started in 2017 after having worked with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies for a while. I quickly realized that there is an issue, the price volatility. We just talked about it. I have the most expensive tattoo in the world because I paid a few Bitcoins for it back in 2015. So Bitcoin couldn't really be used as a day-to-day means of transfer or day-to-day cash. Today, most of the people involved with specifically Bitcoin, they realize that it is a form of store of value, a long-term hedge against insecurity, and then long-term store of value. That's what the 10-year chart shows. But using it as a day-to-day currency didn't turn out to be the smartest thing. But what it meant for me is that very early, I realized that we need to create a stable version of a cryptocurrency. That today is not a strange phenomenon. We've got Tether dollar, Gemini dollar, DAI, Circle dollar, all kinds of stable coins, which are essentially cryptocurrencies that are backed by fiat money, like let's say $1 or a bank deposit. ARYZE, our mission is to create what we call digital cash. I'm not going to embark on a long journey where I try to tell you all why fractional reserve banking is bad and why we need to have a full reserve model and go back to something that's called the Chicago Plan. But essentially, ARYZE wants to digitize cash. We want to create a digital version of a $100 bill that is equally secure, meaning it has government guarantee. And second of all, and almost even more important, that it's yours, right? The ownership of the actual bearer instrument is the bearer of the asset, like a paper note. If you got a $100 bill in your pocket, nobody can take it from you unless you give it to them. And that's the idea, to have that kind of credit security inside digital currencies. Now, what the hell does that have to do with anything regarding NFTs? Well, in order to understand on ARYZE and our mission and the whole why are we even digitizing cash, we need to just briefly touch upon what is blockchain. And I'm not going to do the whole Bitcoin 101. I'm just going to say a few words of the essence of blockchain and distributed computing. We are mostly used to centralized solutions, whether it is Facebook or Uber or Google. We are entities that goes into a store and then we receive a service of sorts and then we leave the store. That centralized model is mostly what is in place today. But we have also seen alternative solutions over the years. Like, for example, a few years ago, it was very popular to torrent movies. Of course, nobody here has ever done so because we don't like piracy. But the reason why movie piracy and software piracy was so difficult to crack down on, and still is, actually the Danish anti-piracy group in Denmark, they lost, they gave up. And why is that? Well, torrenting is very difficult to crack down on because the movie that you're downloading is not on some server somewhere in the data farm where they can just go under some jurisdiction and say, you need to get rid of that movie or else we'll sue the hell out of you. The movie was actually fragmented into thousands of pieces, and then it was spread out to individual people who were watching the movie. Like, so if you were watching the movie, you were also actively sharing to someone else that was watching the movie. So there was no centralization of a movie database. All of the bits and pieces of the music and the movies were fragmented. That made it almost impossible to crack down on. And that is just a small showcase of the strength behind distributed computing power. With Bitcoin, which was kind of the first version of a distributed network that went mainstream. It was a really, really smart mechanism because there was gamification in it, there was built-in scarcity, there was the monetary values, there was all the components for us to get hooked on that. That's exactly what the world kind of needed. But the biggest strength of Bitcoin and all these cryptocurrencies are that there is no centralization. There is no central point of failure, or at least there shouldn't be. But that also means that there are really no entry barriers to partake in the system. If you want to accept payments for, say you are knitting hats and you want to sell your hats for $5 on the internet on a website, you need a payment service provider agreement, a corporate bank account, let's say maybe a PayPal account or whatever you choose to do, so that you can actually receive money through the card schemes. And then somebody needs to allow you to do so. Bitcoin was the first digital valuable instrument that you can play around with without asking anybody for permission first. That's basically the essence of open source technologies, right? And Bitcoin is exactly that. Now, one of the cases that I worked with over the years is, for example, we during my time in Coinify, we worked on a project where we wanted to tokenize a property, like not so much the actual brick and mortar, but the actual ownership of the house. The way it works today, when you transfer ownership of a house in Denmark, we are mostly fully digitized. We're one of the most digital countries out there, and like our national currency is 95% digital. Our digital IDs are digital. our IDs are digital, and everybody has to have a government issued ID, and you have to have a NIP contour in a bank. The banks run the same protocols. It's like super modern, but it is extremely legacy. We've had it for a while. And when you've had something for a while, you're not ready to jump on into the newest and greatest platforms, where you cannot really do that leap of faith or take that jump, because it kind of works pretty well the way it is. And the way that you buy a house in Denmark today is, or you transfer the deed, you sign in, you connect to these large data centers that are in Denmark, and then you initiate your communication with the state. It is still a centralized model. There's no fanciness about it. It's just a digital way to communicate with the right authorities. In the good old days, I don't know when, but it didn't used to be like that. Actually, the Danish word for deed, like to your house, is skød. And skød, the literal translation in Danish, it means lap, like your lap. The reason it's called skød is because the way that you used to transfer property in Denmark was that the men in the village would meet in this circle, and then Bob would take some soil of his property and throw it onto the lap of Charlie, like a symbolic gesture that showed that he had now completed the transfer of ownership to this new man, right? And the witnesses were the men in the circle. The consensus and the agreement, kind of the database of who owns what in that village, was maintained by the villagers. This all changed when the king came and we needed to have a centralized ledger, and there was a whole thing with taxation, and so that was a whole thing. But the reason I'm mentioning it is because it's extremely similar to how to some of the models that we're moving ahead to with blockchain is actually inspired by older models that we used to have. The USB keys to the right of this picture is one of the early Bitcoin miners, but it just shows that each individual pen drive is a node in the network. It's like a person around the circle. And whenever person A wants to transfer Bitcoin from A to B, these individual nodes all have to approve the transaction, to keep it simple. That model, that is what is the success behind the cryptocurrencies today. That's why the Bitcoin has more computing power than all the world's supercomputers combined. It's a very dumb supercomputer, but in terms of computing power, it is extremely powerful. And we're only just seeing the beginning with what's happening with DeFi and smart contracts, because when you start adding smart contracts to the mix, smart contracts being programmable logic that you can code into the transfer of an asset itself, or behavior that you can code into the actual assets themselves. But for example, a regular contract, like when you buy and sell a house, it goes through an intermediary. It goes through a middleman who needs to facilitate the transfer. And often it goes through various middlemen. A smart contract is still peer-to-peer, like a transfer of cryptocurrencies are. It's between one address to another. And whatever logic you choose to program in between is kind of hard-coded into the system itself. Everyone can see the logic and the rules. Now, this becomes really important as we start talking about NFTs and all these things. But to just give a short example of another case that I was involved with, this one involved the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Denmark, as well as a company that we worked with. I can't remember, but they made these solar housing systems. Now, these solar panels were intended to get installed on the roofs of impoverished people so that they can start getting basic electricity. However, it's kind of expensive for these families, I think this one was in Kenya, to pay the upfront cost of installing a solar panel. So we created a mechanism where users could donate cryptocurrencies to an address. In this case, it was Bitcoin. And like a top-up card, like a prepaid top-up card, if there was money on the card, the solar panel would produce electricity. And that would mean that this lady could partially fund her new solar panel without a huge upfront payment. And the people that invested would get a cut of the earnings when this lady, to the picture of the right, started charging neighbor phones in the community. So there's a kind of a dividend payout based on how much you invested in the first place. And when the profits are when it becomes profitable, the lady could invest in a secondary panel, and then a third panel, and then so on, so on, so on, so forth. This was all enabled by the fact that we now had blockchain as a vehicle of transfer of value. We had cryptocurrencies, which were programmable money. What was the final part? Essentially, the entry barriers to work with blockchains are non-existent in the same way as if this lady were to hold a bank account in Kenya. Like most individuals in these areas that we're working with do not have a regular bank account because the banks don't want them. Technology doesn't care. Now, when we're talking about NFTs, NFTs are non-fungible tokens, and it's just a brand. It's just a thing which is the latest hype of the day. So I'm getting asked to talk about NFTs, but the concept of NFTs is just a part of this whole digitization of assets and of various instruments, where different instruments get to exist on this new form of database, the blockchain, right? We talked about the centralization versus decentralization. When we say tokenization, we refer to creating an asset on a blockchain, and that asset can be 1,000 different things. So it's very difficult to pinpoint and say it's exactly this or that. One of the most popular blockchains, called Ethereum, they allow for anyone to create their own cryptocurrency, like just make your own token. Now, whatever this token represents depends on the issuer, the creator, right? It's just like WordPress lets you create a website, Ethereum lets you create a token. But what we have then seen lately is that artists are starting to tokenize their artwork or elements related to their artwork. And now why would one do that? Well, a token on a blockchain is essentially a digital file that you cannot copy and paste. The pasted version, like when you paste it, is not valid, doesn't work. The system knows that it's a copy. And why? How does it know? Well, because if you have to make a copy that's equally as truthful as the original, well, you have to convince all of the miners involved in the network. That's kind of how it goes. I'm not going to explain the details, but just trust me on this one. Now, we have seen various examples of NFTs lately where artists or people or scammers and meme creators and anyone is creating an NFT. Like a few years ago where everyone was making an ICO because suddenly you could just fundraise without, following the prospectus laws. And that's at least what a lot of people thought. And that's why crypto crashed in 2018. So a huge adjustment, right? Luckily, ARYZE conducted an STO and followed the prospectus laws and did all the good stuff there. So we're clean with the regulators and we're on the same footing as regulators. But I have personally been involved with the concept of NFTs for quite a while now. Like when I worked a little bit with Sony many years ago, where we talked about how we could tokenize music so that royalties can be more easily distributed to the participants of the production of the music. If you look at any popular modern song, it's not just the artist and the record label and the producer. I saw one of the tracks by Rihanna. There was a person who laid a clap, and that clap, every time this song gets played on the radio, this person gets royalties for his clap, right? Because that's a unique clap. So when we talk about, are you your data and whatnot? No, you are not your data, but your data is you. You are so much more than the data, but the data that is created because of you should still be yours, in my opinion. And that's what NFTs for the record labels and for music can, for example, enable. It will probably not be the record labels because they like taking 80, 70% of a song and then basically take all the revenues to themselves. The record labels are also a struggling business like many other legacy industries are. But artists themselves are now starting to do this. They're starting to digitize their artwork in a way where they create a kind of an ownership certificate of sorts that they can then sell out into fragmented bits and pieces. Whether this fragmented piece of token actually represents anything, well, that varies. You could create a mechanism where you say that we're creating an NFT based on this song, and we're then allocating the ownership of this song to the holders of the NFT. The NFT in itself doesn't do that. The NFT in itself is just a token. And the fact that you can create an NFT based on a song, that's not a legal ownership document in itself, but it could be. If we saw that artists, for example, made these kinds of things, as we are seeing, where they're attaching actual values to their IP, we can only start imagining what that can enable. I don't even know how much time I have left, so I'll try to jump a bit ahead and show some examples. Well, this is a Banksy, or it was. Now it doesn't exist. The only thing that actually does exist is an NFT that was made based on this artwork before it was burned. Now, we have a thing that exists. It's a token. It's a token like any other token that you and I could create in a second. But the value of this token is that the artist has actually said and proven that this token was created and could only be created from this original piece of paper, which doesn't exist anymore. So this actual token, it doesn't represent ownership of the painting. The painting or the picture doesn't exist anymore, it's burned. But simply in itself, and because of the scarcity in itself, the fact that this is authenticate and this is an original token, that makes it extremely valuable. I can't remember how much it was sold for, but that's Googleable. Another example, which is more recent, is the Charlie Bit Me video. Look, I can't even say it without the Charlie Bit Me. It's so incorporated in my generation. I remember this video. This one, I think that some of the rights were actually a part of the NFT sale. So what has happened now is that it got taken off YouTube, and I think that there's going to be a remake being done with the new NFT owner because he now owns it, and he, I think, wants to remake it of some sorts because now he can. They actually gave away the ownership of the video. It's his now. Whatever he chooses to do with it is now up to him. This is just the beginning. This is just the very first steps towards tokenization of music and artwork and all kinds of data. And other examples we have seen, we just recently, on our blog.ARYZE.io, we recently did an interview and a live stream with an NFT artist, Robin, who's also here on the call. I saw his face somewhere. He did an amazing interview, and this lady is on the forefront of these kinds of things with AR and NFT, and it's a brand new ways of thinking about artwork and intellectual property rights. But what we have seen are mechanisms where, for example, if an NFT is sold, a portion of the profits goes back to the originator who created the NFT in the first place. So an artist make an artwork, tokenizes it, and this gets sold for $10 million. This person then sells it for $50 million. Well, from his profits, some of that goes back to the artist. And this is some of the things that can be incorporated into the smart contracts. This video shows the viewpoint of a self-driving car. I think it's a Tesla. All of these squares are basically what the car sees. All of these points are tracked and logged and stored and communicated to the centralized Tesla databases. And all of the cars are essentially the same engine, the same brain. So all of Tesla's cars get smarter just by one of the Tesla cars seeing something, right? These kinds of cars, we have them in Copenhagen, not self-driving, but they will be. You can just grab a car off the street and it's filled with cameras. We never ask the questions like, who owns the data that's being collected here? Sure, it's Tesla. I mean, and some guy bought a Tesla and signed the terms of and agreements and whatever, so he's allowed to do whatever he wants. But if I walk past by here and the Tesla sees me and gets some learnings from that, is he or is it allowed to do that? Should it be? Well, currently it is, right? But these are some of the questions which are not being asked. And the logic obtained from mass data can be equally important as the logic obtained by, chips in our brains or scanners in our head, which is because, but whereas one of the scanners feel much more personal, the mass data is like, yeah, well, it doesn't matter. It's not identifiable. It's just big data. It's just noise. When in truth is that these kinds of collection mechanisms are extremely valuable if you know what to do with it, right? So we got to start asking some questions of what's going to happen when machines start paying for stuff in the future, because machines are going to have a kind of an identity of themselves. There's already a Saudi robot, which has citizenship. And we have the concept of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, which are businesses and entire business models which do not exist anywhere else in the blockchain. It's not incorporated. It doesn't exist like Maker and the DAI. They do exist, but the mechanisms behind are fully autonomous. So we can imagine in the future that one of the self-driving Teslas, let's say I become a wealthy philanthropist, who knows if I don't spend all my Bitcoins on stupid stuff, and I choose to buy a Tesla and donate it to itself. I transfer the ownership rights to a new organization, which is structured as a decentralized autonomous organization. And I have this car do Uber stuff for itself. Well, now this car is making money. It's earning a revenue based on driving people around with no driver. And I then write in the smart contract that when you can afford a new Tesla yourself, buy one and replicate your software and your logic to the secondary car. If we then expedite this way of thinking, we could potentially have millions and millions of self-driving cars which only drive what the logic incorporated into logic, like a utility. Like it just becomes like a road itself. It's just a thing you use. We need to start imagining what data can do, and we need to imagine what it means when robots become equally powerful as corporations. And these things are going to happen. Like this last video I'm showing you is very interesting. There is a ringworm. It's like a parasitic worm. I think it's called a ringworm. Very simple in its genetics and its biology. So what we have been able to do, not me at all, not we as I take credit for that, but scientists have been able to replicate a one-to-one version of this animal, of this parasite, virtually. Now, this creature moves like it wants to, decides where to go if you open up the sandbox, and nobody decides where it should go and how it should move, but it's itself. And so imagine this in a few years when you have a virtual zoo, right? You attract a bunch of animals and you have a virtual zoo and you can go poke at them virtually. Like I could poke at this worm. I could give it treats and see if it chases the treats, and I can run experiments. This worm is only designed by the data that makes it. What does that mean for the question, are we our data? No, maybe we're not. But if this robot here learns to do cool shit by tracking a gymnast or just watching the Olympics on TV, and then it does cool stuff, well, maybe the guy or the girl who actually spent 15 years on running the track or jumping around should maybe get acknowledged or credited by the fact that this robot has now taken their skill set. Or maybe your skills are just not valuable data. I think my time is up. Let's maybe go into some questions with this final thing. Oh, sorry. My conclusion of all this, in the future, I think we're going to need to have a kind of human firewall. Whereas when these recording devices of all sorts, they track me, I should have a mechanism around myself, a digital mechanism like a firewall, which asks me, like, do I want to sell this information? And if not, it's just blurred out or censored or some way. We need to have a way of knowing what parts of us are being collected. It's not so much our name and our last name and what books we've read and all that stuff. It doesn't matter what book you read. What matters is how many milliseconds you scroll past the video that you then scroll back to, and then you do like all the micro expressions of your behavior. That's the good stuff. So I think data is enormously important. I think that machines are being created from the recording of our data. And I mean, I think we should get paid for it and know it. Sorry for ranting. Everyone, thank you. If you have any questions.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant, Jack. We've got probably a couple of minutes. Jazel's actually on a phone call, so we're on our own to do this. Jerry, did you want to put your mic on, ask a quick question? I saw you'd asked about resource abuse.
Hi, Jack. That was awesome, absolutely fascinating and very insightful.
Thank you.
I wonder, how do you control the resource abuse required for Bitcoin mining?
You don't control Bitcoin mining, but you just don't use it for if it's too expensive or not feasible for you to use. And let me elaborate a bit on that. Gold is extremely difficult to transfer from A to B. If I have a gold brick and I need to send this across the planet, it's expensive. I need someone to keep it safe. I need someone to guard it. I need some custodian mechanism. I need a bunch of things to transfer this brick of gold. And I think that is actually one of the advantages of gold. Like that's one of the structures that make up gold. One of the advantages of Bitcoin, I think, that it's a very slow and heavy beast to move. And I don't think that it's an engine that should be utilized all the time, like some of these other blockchains are meant to do thousands of transactions per second. I think that personally, the Bitcoin blockchain will go away in some years. When it's not feasible to mine anymore, the miners could just agree to say, look, we'll burn the rest up to the 21 million. Nobody's going to dig for gold in the center of the globe. In the same way, nobody's going to want to mine out the last Bitcoins out of a blockchain when it doesn't become feasible anymore. So we might get away from the Bitcoin blockchain, and then Bitcoin just exists as kind of a consensus, an agreement that this instrument, this limited instrument, has value. And then the Bitcoin blockchain becomes a database that you can just download out of Wikipedia, like a ultimate state of truth. From there on, Bitcoin could live on the Ethereum ledger. Bitcoin could live on the Cardano ledger. Bitcoin could exist elsewhere than the Bitcoin blockchain. So I don't see that there is a need to start messing around with the Bitcoin protocols itself, because that would make it not Bitcoin. And no one could. Like no one could. They've tried with Bitcoin Cash, and that's why we got a fork. And it is no one's mandate to do so. I know Elon Musk likes to tweet a lot, but eventually, like, it's not up to him or I. It is up to the miners, which algorithm they choose to mine. As long as it's profitable to mine Bitcoin in the current form, they will continue to do so. And the ones who want to use it, just choose a different platform, a second layer solution. It doesn't matter. Don't use Bitcoin as a Bitcoin blockchain. Use Bitcoin as an asset. Sorry, that was again a long answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
Jack, I get a number of messages, I'm sure you do too, about the environmental impact of Bitcoin and others. People talk about 2% of global CO2. One thing that you might want to mention is that, and you touched on this, I think, is that some coins, of course, some exchanges are moving away from mining entirely as a proof of stake or a proof of work. Do you want to speak to that for a second?
Yeah, so Bitcoin was the first version of a cryptocurrency that went mainstream. The technology behind Bitcoin is based on the fact that you need more and more computing power to get a piece of the pie, to keep it simple. Since the invention of Bitcoin, we have seen the creation of a lot of alternatives. One of them, Richard, you're talking about is the proof of stake, where you don't have to have a lot of computing power. You just need to have a lot of the tokens of the blockchain you're mining or you're staking, and you become a validator node by in that way, right? But there's a lot of amazing innovation happening. There is centralized DeFi, where you have the advantages of DeFi, but you choose who the validators are. So you can say, look, we're a corporation of 25 different businesses, or let's all make a blockchain, all of us. We all run a node and we all trust each other without actually trusting each other. And so just still talking about how Bitcoin is expensive and Bitcoin is this and that. It's a conversation that we're only having today because Elon Musk is too late to the game. And we're talking about 2013 issues now. We're known that we're past that. Like, so he will also realize that you're not going to make Bitcoin green again. It's never been green. What you can do is make a green alternative and see if that holds up, and it probably would.
Jack, I hate to say it's all we've got time for. It pains me to say that, but it's just about time we got tonight. Taking you off your work is a huge expense to this world, so thank you for spending a bit of time with us. You do some amazing things.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Just amazing. Thank you so much.
If anyone wants to get in contact with me, just add me on LinkedIn. My last name, I think I'm the only one with it. So just add me on LinkedIn, drop me in, connect with me. Love to connect.